Home Secretary Suella Braverman has hit back at her critics following her speech in Washington last week when she said multiculturalism has failed and called for international action to curb mass migration. Well, this prompted Sir Elton John to accuse her of risking legitimising hate and violence against gay migrants, while Gary Lineker publicly accused her of being disingenuous at best. How could she know whether gay people were really gay or just pretending to gain asylum? But the Home Secretary has accused the stars of being an out-of-touch, pampered elite who were lecturing the rest of us on how we should think about very, very serious issues affecting the majority of British people. Well, joining me now is Steve Valdez-Symonds, who is a Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International. Good morning to you, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, just briefly, what did you make of what Suella Braverman had to say in her speech last week? And then we'll come on to the criticisms.
Well, I thought her speech was pretty disgraceful, to be honest. There are a number of things that she said which were, at best, pretty slippery with the truth, not least her picking out of gay refugees and indeed women refugees for targeting as if somehow this group of, probably the minority, certainly in this country, of refugees were somehow pampered and privileged by international refugee laws, which is far from true. So, no, I didn't care very much for her speech, and I'm not surprised it's attracted a lot of criticism, including from within her own party. Well,
indeed, yes, we're always going to have that in the Tory party on those big issues. They're sort of quite defining issues now. But in terms of what Sir Elton John said, in terms of what the criticism from Gary Lineker, the argument was basically, you know, you're heartless. I think, you know, Elton John basically saying, you know, you're inviting, you know, violence and prejudice against specifically gay or, you know, LGBT migrants. Did you think those were valid criticisms, or do you think Suella Braverman's quite right to say a pampered elite sitting in their homes in Saint-Tropez, getting their private jets, totally and utterly unimpacted by the arrival of tens of thousands of migrants to our shores, not actually being affected by it in any way whatsoever, that actually it was, you know, the pampered elite, not, well, just being completely out of touch?
Well, I'm no defender of great wealth one way or the other, but it seems to me that Suella Braverman is pretty pampered and out of touch. Let's just remember that under her watch, the cost of the asylum system, and we're concerned about such things and direct impact on, say, the taxpayer, has essentially doubled, and she's barely been the Home Secretary for a year. Under her and her predecessor's watch, as Amnesty warned 3 years ago, there has been a massive escalation in the asylum backlog in this country, and that all comes down to the policies that she and her predecessor pursued, which have deliberately refused to process the asylum claims of many thousands of people.
Well, hold on a minute. I don't think it's the Home Secretary trying to not, you know, insist that civil servants don't process the claims. It's the civil servants who've got a record now that the latest figures suggest they are each individually, on average, processing one asylum claimant a week. It is the productivity in the Home Office, largely people working from home, as far as we can gather, according to Whitehall figures, that has meant that people are not being assessed.
I'm sorry, that's entirely untrue.
You're saying Suella Braverman is saying, whatever you do, don't press these people. We want to spend £6 million, £8 million a day putting them up in three-star hotels. You think that's the deliberate government policy?
Because it is a deliberate government policy.
Really?
It was first introduced by Priti Patel at the end of 2020 when she passed immigration rules to allow her to refuse to process people's claims. Suella Braverman has gone to the extent of making legislation only earlier this year to mean that she will not in future be even permitted under law to process people's claims. And both of these Home Secretaries have done this for the utterly bizarre reason that they have concluded that if you don't process people's claims, somehow in the future, that will mean less people arriving to claim asylum. Amnesty wrote right at the end of 2020, when Priti Patel started this nonsense, to make perfectly clear that this was going to create backlogs in the system, We could not have predicted how quickly or how enormous those backlogs would be.
I don't think there's anyone who wants...
But that has proved to be the case.
I don't think there's anyone who wants the backlogs. You could argue the backlog is these court challenges against government policy that's been enacted by a government with a large majority, Democratic votes, supported by a large percentage of the population. And that's what's causing part of the backlog problem. And the fact that just tens of thousands more people are paying people smugglers £3 grand, £4 grand, £5 grand to get a nice little dinghy over here. I mean, how is that the Home Secretary's fault? I don't want to defend the government,
but it's a matter of fact and law that the current Home Secretary has passed laws that prevent her, or will prevent her when she enacts them, from ever processing people's claims. And she has pursued a policy from her predecessor by her own discretion of refusing to process people's claims. Thousands of people.
OK, but here's the thing, Steve. Even if they did process all those claims and everyone was dealt with in a week and it was all looked at and a load of people were found not to have legitimate claims, people like you would still campaign to stop those people being deported. So what's the sodding point of processing them in the first place? They're going to end up staying here.
Sorry, if you want to read what Amnesty says, we have always made clear that people's claims must be processed fairly and efficiently. And if it's properly concluded that people have no entitlement to stay, it is perfectly appropriate to take reasonable steps to seek to return them to the countries they have come from. Amnesty has never said anything different. We do object to trying to force people onto planes to remove them from the country without considering their claims properly, which unfortunately this Home Secretary has committed herself to doing.
OK, really good to talk to you. Great to get your thoughts. Steve Valdez-Symonds from Amnesty, thank you for joining us.